Es lebe Deutschland!
Kaserne vor dem großen Tor stand eine Laterne und steht sie noch davor. So wollen wir unser Wiedersehen, bei der Laterne wollen wir stehen, wie einst Lili Marleen, wie einst Lili Marleen.
The Allied defeat of the elite Africa Corps led to the decision to ship thousands of German prisoners of war to the United States. This decision both avoided the logistics problems of feeding and housing large numbers of prisoners in a war zone and supplied labor desperately needed on American farms and ranches. Eventually, 450,000 German POWs from the North African and European theaters of war were interned on American soil. The Kansas POW experience represented a cross-section of the total American story. The important part of that story was the change in the lives of the prisoners and Kansans in ways that neither of them anticipated. The experience of capture was imprinted on the memory of every POW. Gerd Cruz, a former POW in Kansas who now farms in Deschler, Nebraska, recalled the facts of where and when he was taken prisoner.
I was captured in Bizerte in Africa, 1943, May the 9th, 12:30 noon.
He described feelings that were typical of many German soldiers.
No, I think it was an awful feeling, you know, to you just abandon your motherland and you go to a different country. You don't know what could happen, what could, but what's up, you know. It's a funny feeling.
Immediately after capture, prisoners were subjected to a thorough search for weapons and marched off to distribution centers. Conditions in these centers were often harsh, with little water and no sanitation facilities for as many as 30,000 men. Souvenir-happy American GIs routinely relieved the German POWs of watches, pens, cameras, and medals. After a cursory interrogation, the prisoners went to embarkation points at Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers, their boarding ships for the journey to America. Life aboard ship in most cases was good. On some ships, in fact, the prisoners ate ice cream, slept in cabins, and played shuffleboard. Some American newsmen made accusations of coddling. The POWs landed at either Norfolk, Virginia, or Camp Shanks, New York. Some of them were zealous, expected to see New York City in rubble from Luftwaffe raids. After a hot shower with good smelly soap, shots, and delousing, the men were ready for the trip west. In Germany, soldiers often rode in boxcars. In America, they rode in upholstered coaches and were served sandwiches and coffee by black porters. One prisoner remarked, "Many anti-American feelings disappeared on the trip to Kansas." Security on the trains was tight. Windows locked, location signs removed from depots. The guards were told, "Don't be cruel, but hard-boiled." When finally the POWs arrived at their camps, whole towns turned out to see the Germans in their short campaign pants, khaki uniforms, long-billed caps, and goggles. The POWs who alighted in Kansas were surprised not to see buffalo and Indians. They found themselves at Camp Phillips in Salina and Camp Concordia. These stark new facilities were among the largest POW compounds in America. Frank Carlson, former Kansas governor and U.S. congressman and senator, explained the selection of the Concordia campsite.
Someone in Washington had suggested, I assume, that Concordia ought to be checked, and they did come in here and check the area. And it was determined by the War Department itself that this would be a good location for a prisoner of war camp. The location was good, and no problems with a good water supply, some good land that seemed to fit for the War Department, and it was for that reason there was no problem about getting it established here.
Attitudes of the residents toward the decision were mixed.
We had many people that wanted this camp established because it was a remunerative operation for a business and the location, and I didn't get too much complaint from the general public. The city of Concordia, for instance.
Employed by the Corps of Engineers during camp construction, Beryl Ward explained the opposition mentioned by the senator.
I think it was probably just fear of the unknown. They were afraid there'd be escapes and there would be problems arise for the town people. And of course, some of them had sons in service, and I think they were ones that didn't look too kindly on having prisoners around here.
Complaint about the camp disappeared almost completely when public fears proved baseless. Rapidly constructed camps Phillips and Concordia began to receive prisoners in 1943. With a capacity for 3,000 POWs, Phillips was smaller and its life briefer than Concordia. The latter was a small and self-sufficient city for the 4,000 POWs and guard garrison housed there. Many civilians from the nearby area also worked at the camp. Located north and east of Concordia, the camp was on a large tract of land with a slight grade and encircled by a high barbed wire fence and guard towers. Only a few physical signs remain to mark the campsite, including a restored guard tower, storage sheds, masonry work, the officers' club, and a water tower that dominates the country scene. The camp was laid out with the military affinity for square corners. Street names such as Lee and Grant commemorated American war heroes. Within the camp complex were scores of barracks, mess halls, workshops, libraries, clubs for officers and enlisted men, athletic facilities and a hospital, post office and post exchange. Although Camp Phillips had a fairly placid history, Camp Concordia was in disorder until a new commander in late 1943 infused discipline in the American Army unit and ended Nazi control of the POWs. A small Nazi corps intimidated the mass of POWs who were patriotic but unsympathetic to fascism, and apparently drove some of them to suicide. Using information probably obtained from anti-Nazi prisoners, the military police raided the compound, pulled the incorrigible Nazis from the ranks, and shipped them to an Oklahoma camp. POW escape attempts were few and always ended in failure. No person was endangered in the incidents, and they often had a humorous side. One German officer got out of Camp Concordia unnoticed and made his way a few miles to Belleville. While in uniform, he casually bought a railroad ticket at the depot and had breakfast at a restaurant. He was arrested only when the waitress became suspicious because he seemed unfamiliar with the money. A tragedy, both by American and POW accounts, occurred at Camp Concordia when a guard shot and killed a prisoner in the fire zone along the fence when he tried to retrieve a soccer ball during a game. The POWs thought that the shooting was murder, and the rumor spread among them that the guard had bragged earlier that he would kill a Nazi. Their resentment was natural, but malice was not proved in the guard's court-martial. This episode marred an otherwise exceptional record of the American military and its relations with the men they guarded. Perhaps friction between guards and POWs could not always be avoided, but American personnel treated the POWs correctly and carefully followed the Geneva Convention. Gerd Cruz concurred in regard to treatment he received.
I think it was good. It was good. So I cannot complain. Cannot complain at all. I think it was good overall to speak, and it was a good treatment.
For guards and POWs to become friendly was common. and guards often overlooked minor prisoner violations of camp policy, especially their manufacture of schnapps. Civilian employees at the camps frequently did not know what to expect from the POWs. Bernadine Cummings, who worked in the transportation office at Concordia, described her first meeting with the prisoners.
My first encounter with the prisoners at the camp was when they came in to get a drink of water in the wing of the building where I was at. And I was a little apprehensive at the time, not knowing what to expect of them, because they came in and they looked at me and they clicked their heels and saluted, and I couldn't figure out what that was all about. And
the Americans liked the POWs' work ethic, politeness, and good humor. They also found mutual interests and attitudes with the POWs that led to friendships. Such was the experience of Mrs. Cummings.
My relationship with most of the prisoners that I worked around was very congenial. They were people just like you and I. They all had feelings, they all had concerns about their families back home and whether they were alive or what was happening. And they were just normal people to be around.
The policy at Camp Concordia was to keep the POWs active. They had a wide variety of jobs in the camp. They worked at construction and maintenance, had office assignments, and ran many of the shops. The POWs gave the camp much of its attractive appearance, and Army reports described Concordia as a beautiful facility. Attractive gardens and neat lawns could not conceal that Concordia was a POW camp, but they provided it with an unexpected aesthetic quality. Prisoners planted Chinese elms in straight rows along the post-entrance road. Mature trees now marked the camp spot, together with rock walks built by the POWs that now wind through yards and fields. Skilled at masonry, the POWs constructed a fence at the camp entrance that still stands. Manually adept, the prisoners used scraps, surplus materials, and original ideas to turn plain building interiors into attractive and colorful rooms. Small officers' clubs, decorated and called casinos, were talked about throughout the area. POWs used their leisure time for physical activity and athletics, to acquire and practice hobbies, to read, study, and take academic courses, to present and attend cultural and entertainment events such as plays and band concerts, including those by the Africa Corps Band, and to publish a camp newspaper. The prisoners, especially the officers at Camp Concordia, were well educated, and this was reflected in their pastimes. Painting and drawing were popular activities, and the creations of the POWs ranged from rudimentary to highly professional. The POWs sold and gave to civilians their artwork as well as their carvings, models, and toys that they made from bits of wood, metal, and cloth. Looking toward the end of the war, some prisoners made toy trains, animals, and cars to take to their children, whom many of the men had never seen. American authorities encouraged both self-study and organized education in the camps. The library at Concordia had more than 7,000 volumes and was considered one of the best collections in Kansas. The POW University of Camp Concordia was organized, and its structure and curriculum paralleled those of the civilian institution. POW officers were the instructors of courses that ranged from beginning English to technical medical subjects. The university had substantial enrollments, and the instructors always knew where their students were. Some of the prisoners eventually earned academic credit through the POW University. One of the controversial issues in the POW program in America was the attempt to ingrain democratic values in the prisoners, a practice that raised many ethical questions. Military authorities at Concordia tried to influence the POW attitudes through regulation of the materials they could read and movies they could watch, such as The Keys of the Kingdom. Many prisoners, however, were receiving an education in democracy that was more effective than any official program could have been. They were learning about democracy from their contact with Kansans, especially outside the barbed wire in communities throughout the state. The simple presence of German prisoners in camps in Kansas would have been of little significance for the region had not the prisoners had the opportunity to meet Kansans. That opportunity, however, was abundant, mainly because, in accordance with the Geneva Convention, the United States Army used prisoners to alleviate the wartime labor shortage. The work performed could not be